Yes, some of these programs, cover tuition and there's a lot of benefits, but, we still gotta pay rent, so we still gotta eat. And so investing more, expanding more financial resources for those programs, I think would also help Gen Z, working class, BIPOC, first gen folks enter the teaching workforce more.
It's Taj of the
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher here in the Los Angeles area, and I just wrapped up year 19 in the classroom. Looking forward to year 20. And this, of course, here is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. Shout out to anybody who is joining us for the very first time. We drop these full episodes, these video format episodes, about every other week, more or less, featuring a super dope guest. And then in between those, we drop passing periods. And Jeff, these full video episodes take some time to edit and all that. So full transparency to our audience. We are filming this early in June, like June just started, but it's coming out June 24th. And Jeff, I know that when you think about June, it's Pride Month. June 24th, that's, a couple days after Juneteenth. And I suspect that by the time this episode posts, Jeff, because of our celebration of Pride Month and our celebration of Juneteenth, we might have arrived at a point where we've solved racism and homophobia and transphobia, and everybody is united together in a nice, happy, humanizing world. So, Jeff, it's possible. It's possible. We might should celebrate or something. I don't know, man. What you think? What are the odds we're solving it this month, Jeff?
Manuel, while I always appreciate your optimism and your critical lens on the world, I'm going to take a bold stance and say 0% chance you just said is even remotely true. In fact, I'm going to put some money on the side of like stuff's about to be a little bit worse by the time this episode comes out, relative to the time when we are recording it, given the, given the powers that be that we're grappling with right now, sadly.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the way things are trending. And yeah, I agree with you. 0%, less than zero, if that was mathematically possible. But folks,
-%, yes.
It's not too late to get together with some folks and refresh and tap back into that hopeful, humanizing spirit. So we do want to remind folks, or let folks know if you're joining us for the first time, that our good friends at Human Restoration Project are about a month away from the Conference to Restore Humanity, which, if you go to the website, humanrestorationproject.org/conference, and register for the conference, you'll see it's a dope lineup of guests. And if you use the code AOTA, for all of the above, AOTA, you'll get a discount that'll also go to support this show, and more importantly, you'll be able to engage in a conference that will hopefully help us tap back into the important human aspect of being educators and being in this work at a time when the work seems quite difficult. So Jeff, let's see, full episode. We're going to talk about a couple stories, couple headlines in education, and we're going to have a super dope guest on board today. Let us know, folks. Let us know, Jeff. Jeff, you are folks right now. Let us know, man, what's on the agenda for today's episode.
Yeah, man. Well, as per usual, we got a good one for everybody, and we have a fantastic guest coming on the show today, Manuel. And after our last full episode where we had on two guests talking to us about issues of sustainability and avoiding burnout in the teacher profession, we are now going to have a guest on who is not even, I guess you would say, a brand new, but an incoming future teacher in our wonderful field of education, and who's also a young teacher, a member of the notorious Gen Z, as it might be said. And we're going to dig into, Manuel, these questions of a Gen Z perspective on the teaching profession. We are in the midst of a national teacher shortage that everybody knows and is feeling very acutely. And so in a world where we need more young folks to be excited about and entering into the field of education, what is the perspective of folks in Gen Z? as they, sort of enter into the adult and professional world or consider a career change after trying something out for a couple of years and that sort of thing. So we're going to dig deep into a Gen Z perspective on the teaching profession in these tumultuous times of a teacher shortage and of course, all of the major issues that have gripped the headlines for the last several years with the pandemic and the racial reckoning and all of that. So we're going to get into that today with Bryant Odega, who's a aspiring teacher. He's currently an educator here in Los Angeles and entering into a master's program at our alma mater, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and has chosen the path as a teacher. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion, folks. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Yeah, sounds dope. We got Black excellence, we got UCLA dopeness, Harvard dopeness, Gen Z dopeness, I guess. Gen Z could qualify as dope, although they probably won't ever use that word because it's a old folks term around here, dope. But super dope guest on board for today's seminar. But up first, of course, we're going to take a look at headlines in the world of education, and that's going to be in our Do Now. Coming up next. Stay tuned. All right, folks, it's time for today's Do Now, where we like to take a look at news and headlines around the world of education. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, today we're going to get into some key vocabulary. Got to understand the terms and concepts. For today's conversation, we have a lexicon.
All right, lexicon, let's go. Let's build up this vocabulary. Jeff, our first lexicon term for today is cha-ching.
Nice. Cha-ching. Somebody's getting paid out there.
Facts.
I would assume. I use this term when I, get a little check from a consulting gig or, that every other Friday payday. I'm like, nice. Cha-ching. So I'm assuming that's what we're talking about here, man. Well, it's payday for someone.
It absolutely is payday for someone in a very big way. And you would think, okay, We're talking about payday and we're talking about education, so maybe this is a story about properly funding our public schools and boosting our support and resources, especially for the most marginalized schools and districts in our nation. But it's not that. It's not that at all. Someone's getting paid, but it ain't the schools that you and I have historically worked with, Jeff. So let's get into it. We get the story by way of the
surprise.
Yeah, surprise. We get this story by way of the Tampa Bay Times, thanks to some reporting from Jeffrey S. Solochek. And he reports that St. Paul Catholic School in St. Petersburg, Florida, initially told its families not to expect much of a difference in its tuition charges for next fall. But that happened to change after Jeffrey's favorite governor, Ron DeSantis, I think newly crowned #1 AOTA show hater, taking the crown from former U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. But yeah, Governor DeSantis signed into law a measure making state-funded private school vouchers of about $8,000 available to all school-age children, regardless of income. So now, instead of paying $6,000 per child at St. Paul Catholic School, families will now be charged $10,000 per child, and non-members of the church will be charged $12,000 per child, which is a $5,000 hike from last year. And with the $8,000 from the state covering most of that cost, families will owe far less than what they had been paying, and the school will end up receiving more. Now, the school's Monsignor Robert Gibbons, the St. Paul pastor, said in a YouTube video, quote, "If we don't take full advantage of this funding source, we will be leaving money on the table and it'll revert back to the state." So all told, St. Paul Catholic School could bring in nearly $1 million more in the upcoming school year, thanks to this voucher program. And Jeff, I think it's important to note that the school leaders are helping families learn how to apply for this voucher to get that money in order to cover the tuition hike, which will actually be a tuition cut for these families at St. Paul Catholic School, with the school pocketing quite a bit of that money. Cha-ching, cha-ching, Jeff. What are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts about this story, Manuel. My first one is like literally nothing surprising about this at all. The behaviors of all the individuals and institutions involved in this equation are exactly predictable behaviors. However, I will say one component that wasn't necessarily surprising when I did read about it here, but was actually something I hadn't thought of, is the extent to which this is incentivizing greed and, and hoarding of resources by religious leaders being funded by the state and religious institutions being funded by the state. And let's keep it real here. What we're talking about is also largely the most conservative religious leaders and religious institutions being funded by the state, who also just happen to be among the folks who are the most discriminatory and bigoted institutions in our country, or at least among that group. Not that they're unique in that way at all, right? But these are like very anti-LGBT organizations, for example, right? Or organizations that have, for example, prohibitions on women being in certain positions of leadership, as another example, right? So, what I hadn't thought about, Manuel, because I was so wrapped up in just the sort of general philosophical issue of separation of church and state, and the expression of a largely right-wing Christian conservative, but certainly I'm sure there's other religions that are participating in this effort as well. But it's generally that, group of folks who are pushing for this and exercising this policy agenda, and they're sort of disciples in our political states. So I was busy with the conversation of like, we need to maintain the hard separation of church and state. This is an intrusion of the church into the state, and it is an extraction of resources from the public good into the private religious good, and that this is bad. This is bad in so many ways that even the hateful, slave-holding, raping and pillaging founding fathers of this country realized that the merging of church and state that they had experienced in Europe was a bad look. Even they knew it wasn't good. Okay, they who were like, slavery's cool, were like, but that's bad. So here we are taking steps of regression by the very same people who constantly laud the wisdom of the founding fathers. So I was in that space, Manuel, hadn't even really dug into the idea of what was actually, this was economically incentivizing the behavior it was going to create, which is, of course, these private and religious institutions were going to hoard more money for themselves and then give some crumbs to the people who are paying to have it be a quote unquote win-win. But that effectively what this means is a direct subsidy to the profit margins of private schools. And because they are private schools, these are not nonprofit institutions the way your neighborhood public school is, right? They might technically qualify as being nonprofit in some type of way, but these are institutions that can just raise the salary of the priest or the official who's at the head, who could just take that extra $1 million, right? And there's nothing to be done about it, and no transparency even necessarily to anyone outside the school. So this is hugely problematic, Manuel, despite the fact that it's obviously predictable at the same time. And this represents yet another escalation of this effort to defund, delegitimize public schools, and expand the intrusion of the church, and in particular the most conservative, most hateful, most discriminatory representations of the church into public life. And I think it's extremely dangerous. So that's where I stand on this. What's your take?
Yeah, all of that is absolute facts, Jeff. Absolute facts. We have reported on the show several times different stories related to what type of education students receive at schools. Like I'm not particularly familiar with St. Paul Catholic School itself, but religious schools in Florida in particular, but across the nation in general. We've had a few stories about the curriculums that are used in a lot of these schools and how the curriculums are very, very bad, especially when it comes to matters of evolution or matters of race and the experience of folks in slavery. We've reported on schools that have been very harmful towards their LGBTQ plus students. Students who are LGBTQ plus at any of these schools tend not to be able to express that in any kind of way because these are schools that more or less don't allow that at all. So we've had stories on the show before about the harms being done to queer students at these schools. So it's very bad, very, very bad. It's not surprising. And to be honest, I can't be that mad at the church folks specifically because seems like common sense to me. Like, oh, all of our parents could get this voucher. Let's show them how to get this voucher, and then we could raise tuition. Parents won't be upset because in the end they're going to save money. We'll cash out, on those vouchers. So I'm not really even mad at them. I'm most upset at just our political system in general and the fact that this is even happening. I think this is a very, very important example for folks organizing against vouchers across the nation. A very concrete and illustrative example of what happens when you allow vouchers, especially vouchers that can be used at private schools. I remember in Los Angeles, our city controller during his run for that office, young progressive cat Kenneth Mejia, he had these billboards across the city that were just real simple infographic about just how much money goes to the LAPD. And he had these pie charts on there, and just you couldn't miss them. And they're so simple and digestible for folks who don't really follow this on the day to day that he won easily, because folks are like, damn, that's crazy. Let's get somebody in there who, could monitor this and do what is right to make sure that this doesn't get even worse. So I think this type of story could have that purpose in the states across the country where there are folks trying to organize against vouchers. Like, look, right here, concrete example. Here's a YouTube video from the leaders of this church that have this private school explaining to their members that tuition is going to go up because of these vouchers, and they're going to use these vouchers. And what the guy say, like, if they don't do this, they're leaving money on the table. Like, a concrete example for folks who don't follow this day in and day out to see that, like, oh yeah, no, this is really bad. This is a transfer of, just as you said, transfer of funds from the public good to private hands. And it's unacceptable for sure. I'm most concerned with the fact that these schools tend not to accept the students that need the most support, like, schools, private schools in general, especially religious private schools. They're not going to take a lot of the special ed students. They're not going to take students who, obviously, they're not going to take students who are queer. They're most likely not going to be very supportive of Black and brown students, indigenous students. Like, these, why have a mechanism in place to provide taxpayer funds to schools that are not going to serve the people? So yeah, it's not surprising. It's obviously terrible in many ways, but I think it's very illustrative, and it's an important case for folks to point to during this ongoing fight to protect our schools.
Yeah. Yep. You're exactly right, Manuel. And I want to make just one quick analogy on this too, which is we see this exact same type of move in other elements of society, coming from generally the right-wing conservative leadership of this country, although it is in many ways a bipartisan consensus when it comes to other aspects of the budget, right? So we see this, and we see the negative ripple effects that it has in other areas of life. So let's take corporate subsidies for things, right? So the U.S. government heavily subsidizes the production of things like corn or soybeans or oil. Okay, these kinds of products that we use to run many aspects of our society, right? And, in theory, what this is supposed to do is allow American producers to remain competitive and keep the sort of benevolence of the market running in service of good things for consumers. And yet, what do we see, man? How much is a box of cereal at the store nowadays, right? Like, that heavily subsidized corn is not keeping your price of cornflakes down, right? That heavily subsidized, gallon of oil or barrel of oil is not keeping the price of your, gas down at the pump, right? Like, that money is being taken out of the system by shareholders and wealthy individuals who are in place to do so, to raise their own salaries and do massive stock buybacks and those sorts of things. And we're seeing like that type of consciousness and that type of economic maneuvering now being applied to the public education budget, right? Shifting huge public sums into the privatized space where they can basically skim it off as profit to do whatever they want to do with, and it's essentially unregulatable or unregulated, at least. So just to give an analogy there, like, we're opening up things that we know have negative consequences for people and communities and the environment, for example, into the public education space with a budget that is supposed to be entirely in service of kids and communities. So this is a huge problem, and these kinds of things you can guarantee aren't going to just stay in Florida.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, folks, those of you who are part of conversations around school choice and vouchers and maybe in your state, maybe in your region, whatever, Link to this article is below this episode. I think this is a real concrete example that you could share with folks who are in their head thinking like, what's wrong with the voucher? It makes sense, this and that, whatever. Show them what happens. Like, this is one of the textbook cases of what's going to happen or what will happen when that taxpayer money that should go to support public schools is allowed to walk away from the public schools and go to, in this case, religious schools, independent schools, and what have you. So, yeah. But, Jeff, we do have another lexicon term. We do have another
Indeed.
lexicon term for today before we get to the seminar. So, what we got, man? What we got?
All right, man. Well, next term is lifeline.
Ooh, Lifeline. Reminds me of, speaking of money, speaking of cha-ching, reminds me of that show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Because, you know, the first couple questions were so easy, and then the questions would get more difficult, but you got 3 lifelines that you could use to help you through those questions. I remember, I think it was the first guy who ever won the $1 million on that show, used a lifeline on the very last question just to call his dad and say, I think it was his dad, call somebody and say, I don't actually need your help. I know the answer. I'm just calling to let you know I just made $1 million. Cha-ching, but that is not the term. The term is lifeline. So yeah, he used his lifeline. I suppose this is us using our lifelines to support public schools.
Yes, first of all, can we just say, folks, that was a beautiful connection of our 2 lexicon terms for today, unscripted from Dr. Manuel Rustin. Pass yourself on the back, man. That was well done, Manuel. In this case, we are talking about a lifeline in the form of something that for a whole lot of people is anything but a lifeline, and that is social media as it is used by young people. So fascinating juxtaposition of experiences we're going to get into here, folks. So let's do it. This article comes to us by Claire Kane Miller in the New York Times. And the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, issued an advisory in late May about the effects of social media use on youth mental health. Said Murthy, children are exposed to harmful content on social media, ranging from violent and sexual content to bullying and harassment. And for too many children, social media use is compromising their sleep and valuable in-person time with family and friends. However, the report contained an important caveat for one group in particular, the growing share of young people who identify as LGBTQ. Social media can be a lifeline. Especially for those growing up in unwelcoming families or communities, social media often provides a sense of identity and belonging at a crucial age, much earlier than for many LGBTQ people in previous generations. Quote, it's a lifeline for folks to receive information and to really see that they are not alone and that there are many people like them, said Jessica Fish, who studies LGBTQ youth and their families at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. Young people use social media generally to explore their identities, research has found. By allowing them to do so, it has probably contributed to the fact that LGBTQ people have begun coming out earlier in their lives, which can have long-term positive effects on mental health. So, Manuel, I am so conflicted about this story because I totally get what the data is showing, that for many LGBTQ youth, social media provides a valuable lifeline to support education, networking, love, hope, all that good stuff. And as a former principal and still current administrator type, I will say I hate social media for youth, and I think social media is the devil for children and parents out there. Ain't nothing good happening on social media for your kids. And I feel like both of these statements are true at the same time, and I don't know what to do with myself. So please offer me some wisdom and understanding here.
Yeah, you're right. There is the good and the bad and the ugly, the devilish, to use your characterization of social media. Yeah, this story, it immediately took me to many of my experiences that I've had as a classroom teacher, up to even through this recent school year with students who I have who are LGBTQ and are very, very, very involved in social media spaces. And my interactions with these students and learning from them about the different types of social media that they engage with and just how important it is for them. The spaces, the humanizing, supportive spaces, the ability to be their full self. in ways that they can't always be in the school system or at home or in their own community. So certainly I'm thinking of particular students in my head that I've interacted with this school year. And, Discord in particular, I think for a lot of folks our age, like Discord is one that we're maybe the least familiar with, but particular Discord servers that queer youth are engaged with, where a lot of community, a lot of love, a lot of humanizing interactions are happening there, and in some spaces on TikTok as well. But then there's the other side of it, of course. And I wonder what the research shows, or what the emerging research will show about the antithesis of this, which is, for every queer youth who's able to find a space, a loving, humanizing space online to help them with all of the challenges that come with being queer youth, how many other youth are finding the really hateful, bigoted spaces and are being led towards more extreme thinking about queer youth, or about you name it, because of these spaces there. So like for, each young person who's able to like really tap into the love and humanity through their Discord server, there might be another, person on another server who just came in kind of, neutral on ideas of race or sexuality or gender expression or whatever, but got taken and walked through this path of really extremist thought about it, to the point where they grow up to be the ones marching through Targets and tearing up their Pride Month stuff and putting that on, so like there's two sides of it. So yeah, social media is a very complex space. I think generally speaking, especially from my experience as a classroom teacher, there's way, 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 way more harm than good being done through social media. However, I am, very much supportive of young people having the ability to tap into loving, humanizing spaces, especially those young people who live in communities and families where they can't be their honest, full self. So yeah, man, the good and the bad and the ugly and the devilish, for sure.
Yeah. It's the reality is, like, it's just complicated, right? And things like social media that can be used for great good, for great, sharing of valuable information, right? Especially in a context of, of youth, right? Like, we do collectively as a society such a terrible job with sex education, for example. That's probably a little bit of a strong term, but we have too many pockets in our society that do such a terrible job, an intentionally terrible job with comprehensive sex education. They're like, the ability for young people to learn about their bodies, to understand, things like birth control and family planning, and to understand what happens to you during puberty, and not in the context of someone telling you you're bad and have impure thoughts or whatever. Like, that's extremely valuable and empowering. There's all kinds of just like cool, I watch videos online all the time and learn interesting stuff and see young people using new media to, organize and share information. And it's great and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And I just know, well, as an administrator, the number of fights, the number of eating disorders, the amount of, body dysmorphia, anxiety and depression, cutting and self-harm, bullying. There's so much stuff that is happening with young people in online spaces, in social media, that is extremely toxic. And we have plenty of data that is shared in the Surgeon General's report about how huge chunks, like 40% or 60% of young people report things like, when I'm on social media, I feel worse about myself, like after I'm done, right? Or I feel worse about my body, or these are, if we knew this, if we said to parents, hey, listen, we want your child to like go somewhere, go to the mall for an hour and then come back, and they're going to feel more depressed, more anxious, more self-hating than before they went, parents wouldn't let their kids go to the mall, right? And so I don't think the answer is pure censorship here, right? And that honestly, like, the cat's out the bag. It's too late for that probably now anyways, but we don't necessarily need draconian measures here to like, say like a country like China that like blocks certain platforms or this sort of thing. I don't know that that's the right answer, but I do know that what we're doing right now ain't working well for us. And there's too many young people that are being harmed. And so we've got to find, whether it's better education about media literacy, whether it's better tools for parents to be able to, equip them with the means of controlling access in some way, whether it's limiting time or whether it's like more transparency into what their kids are looking at. And I recognize there's maybe a really slippery slope with what I just said with the needs for, privacy and access for LGBTQ youth who are exploring things, perhaps in a context where, that could be dangerous or harmful if their family knew. So I get it. It's complicated, but like we've got to do something here, Manuel, because leaving it as is a problem. And that's why the Surgeon General is putting out this, this advisory. Like this is a huge mental health issue for young people generally. And frankly, probably for folks our age as well.
Oh, yeah.
Keep it real. But at least we're like a little better equipped and less in a, developmental state of life to like, we got better tools and coping mechanisms and money to spend on therapy and things than, than kids do. And so we need to do something here.
Yeah, man, it's bad. It's bad. Many of my students' action research projects this year focused on mental health issues, and quite a few of them focused on the harms experienced through social media. And yeah, that Surgeon General's report very much is in line with what my students found in their own localized community research about the impact that social media is having on themselves and their peers, from body image issues to just the toxicity of the bullying and all these other things, and just scrolling across and randomly seeing a video of some violence happening somewhere in the world and, not knowing that you're about to watch a video of somebody being killed. Very, very, very challenging stuff ahead for sure. But it is, I think, important to just remember that for many youth, especially as profiled in this article, LGBTQ youth, for many youth, social media is that tool that we were told it would be when it first came out, when it was talking about bringing people together and connections and like all the great things that they said about the internet and early social media. For some folks, it is that in certain ways. So God, it's complicated, man. It's complicated. But
Yep.
Speaking of youth, speaking of young people, we have, I think the first AOTA show guest who is a member of Gen Z, I think, based on my understanding of who qualifies as Gen Z. Definitely the youngest guest that we've had in terms of their educational career. We have, of course, had guests before who are exiting their teacher ed program or recently out of their teacher ed program. Alyssa Solis comes to mind. But this is somebody who's just now about to go into the program, has been working in education for sure, but one of them Gen Zers, and we are curious, as old heads here, as folks who've been in education for 2 decades, we are curious what a young person thinks about this hellscape of a profession as it looks today with all these attacks, with all these, just everything going on. So the Gen Z view of entering the teacher profession, especially from the perspective of a young educator of color, that's coming up next, all right, in our seminar. Bryant Odega in the building. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to All the Above. We really appreciate you. And as you know, All the Above is a small operation. It's just me and just Manuel, that's it. We have no sponsorships, which means we are totally dependent on our amazing audience to help support the show. So here's what you can do. Go to our website, which is aotashow.com/support. That's aotashow.com/support. There you can find links to everything you can do to support the show. You find all the links to every platform that we're on where you can like, subscribe, follow. Make sure you share our show with your whole network. Also, you can donate there. We are on Venmo. We're on Cash App, and most importantly, you can find the link to our Anchor page where you can become a monthly patron. Even a small donation once a month will make a huge difference in helping us continue to produce the show. Lastly, you can find there the link to get your flyest, best, latest, all the above show merch. Okay, all you gotta do is go to aotashow.com/support. Thanks, enjoy the rest of the show. All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us. And we are super excited today to have just a fascinating guest with us. He is I believe, the youngest guest we have ever had on the show, the first, perhaps, member of Gen Z on the show. And we are just excited to dig into this conversation with him because in this time of teacher shortages and just so much drama around the profession, what is the perspective of Gen Z educators or prospective educators? What is the perspective of the generation who is moving into, or we hope, moving into the field of education and becoming the next generation of teachers? So we have Bryant Odega with us, who is an educator here in Los Angeles. Welcome, Bryant, to All the Above.
Thank you, Jeff and Manuel, for having me here. It's truly an honor. I remember when I was applying for grad school, I was looking for, a show where we had educators of color who were talking about, education justice, and I was really excited to find AOTA. Not only because of what y'all talk about, but also the fact that you are based in Los Angeles, just like me. And so I felt like I hit the jackpot. So it's truly an honor to be here with y'all in this space and with the AOTA family.
Well, very much appreciate that, Bryant. And folks, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Bryant Odega is a proud son of Nigerian immigrants. He's an educator serving as a long-term sub and social activist who grew up in the working class neighborhood of Harbor Gateway here in Los Angeles. And he became the first in his family to graduate from college, just a small local college that Manuel might know a little bit about called UCLA.
Yeah.
He's been an organizer in the climate justice movement, as well as a board member for his local neighborhood council. In 2022, he became one of the first Black Gen Z candidates for LA City Council. Bryant serves on the United Teachers Los Angeles Political Action Council of Educators, as well as the UTLA delegate to the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor. He is an incoming candidate for a Master's of Education in Teaching and Teacher Leadership at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, our alma mater, of course, and he is committed to helping students cultivate critical consciousness and making education the practice of freedom. Love that. Bryant, welcome again to All the Above, and I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for our first question.
Yeah, we got Gen Z dopeness in the building. Bryant, first off, congratulations on your burgeoning journey into the world of teaching and earning your fellowship for the Teaching and Teacher Leadership Program at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Jeff and I were there many years ago. So we're very excited about your journey there and all that awaits you in this wonderful world of education. And, every teacher, everyone who enters the teaching profession has their own unique origin story of how they landed in the profession, how and, why they decided that teaching was something that they wanted to pursue. So we thought maybe, we heard a lot of the dopeness in your bio and all that you've been a part of. So we thought maybe we'd start with giving you space to share your story and how you landed at the decision to become a teacher and to pursue a master's in teaching, no less.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and I really appreciate your question. Teaching definitely was not part of my plan. I am a first-gen immigrant. My parents came to this country from Nigeria, and it's kind of a joke within the community. But I think there's some truth in it. The expectation for us to become doctors and lawyers, and so for most of my life, actually, I was, quote unquote, destined to be a doctor, and then so I went to King Drew Medical Magnet High School, Medicine and Science, in the Watts Willowbrook area, to try to get some experience in the hospital environment to see if this was really for me. And just being in the hospital and just seeing all of the physical pain that folks were going through and the needles and there was just so much stuff that I just couldn't stomach. And I pivoted to tutoring in at Carver Elementary in a neighboring King Drew in the Willowbrook Watts area. But before I talk a bit about that, I also want to just talk a bit about, if I can, my upbringing. My dad was a taxi cab driver. My mom was a nurse, is a nurse, and they were hardworking parents who trying to provide for me and my younger sister. My dad, he was in many ways like a hero to me because he drove a taxi, and so although all of the kids at my elementary school were getting picked up by regular cars, I got picked up by a taxi cab, which made me feel really special. But when I was 7, my father was detained by ICE, and he eventually was forced to leave the country. And so that family separation really had a huge impact on our household. My mom, who was in college trying to become an RN, she had to halt her academic aspirations, pivot to become an LVN to provide for me and my younger sister. And so, that early experience of like injustice and my frustration that I really channeled a lot throughout K to 12 because to me my father was a hero. He didn't do anything like criminal, right? He just didn't have documentation, and just that impact beyond my own control really made me feel it was hard to stay motivated in school. And so one of the few things that did help me um I guess stay like rooted in like life was tutoring at the primary school. When I went to King Drew, working with young kids who are so funny, who are so goofy and brilliant, but also at the same time really seeing how some of the experiences that I've had being working class and coming from a household with all types of challenges, seeing how similar experiences have impacted these youth who are having a hard time reading and writing. And I remember that was a huge moment for me, like the overwhelmingness of it all, like me, who's also trying to figure out his own life. There's younger children who are also going through all types of struggles. And I knew I wanted to be in a position where I can make an impact in that area. Teaching was the answer when I transferred to UCLA. So I'm a proud transfer from El Camino College. And at UCLA, I participated in their labor studies program. And one of the courses it's probably the most impactful course for me was on the politics of Latino communities. So learning about the relations between the US and Latin America, but also reading the work of Paulo Freire on pedagogy of the oppressed, about popular education and like the ways of teaching in a way that's like non-traditional, that's more cooperative, democratic, that sees their students as active agents of change. And it was that exact phrasing within that book that I think was the most impactful to me, because I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, me, a broke, blank, working class, black, man trying to make it in America can also be an agent of change despite my circumstances. That was such a huge, impactful moment for me. And that's definitely that experience of knowing that I have power within me and also being critically aware of society, really deconceptualizing like the world and understanding systems of oppression, but also understanding like the power and community power and how that can lead to like community action and change. That's the type of energy and philosophy that I want to bring within the classroom, because I feel like if that kind of approach with professors who really saw me as a human being can empower me to I guess go to Harvard, right? I feel like I can do something similar for a lot of young folks who come from my neighborhood too.
Yeah. Wow. So much of that resonates, Brian. I really appreciate that that aspect of your journey and what has driven you to the field of education. And I think Manuel and I both, as veteran educators at this point, have some worry that with all the drama around the profession of teaching and the field of public education generally right now, the sort of question of who's going to want to do this work, comes to mind, right? And we're in the midst of this sort of right wing hysteria around quote unquote critical race theory and wokeness, and we have salaries that aren't keeping pace with the cost of living and rising cost of housing in many cities, like here in LA, that make it hard for for teachers to live close by where they teach. And this hysteria about curriculum and book bans and all this kind of stuff that's sort of swirling around our profession. And I can imagine, especially as you hinted at, in the context of your family, where maybe you're being asked, like, why are you wasting your talent becoming a teacher? Go be a doctor, or that sort of thing. How do you respond to that? What is sort of your message to folks who are considering joining the teaching profession or coming into the profession of education? How are you navigating this choice as a future and a current and future educator?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The issues you raised about the threats and attacks on education is so real. One of the main reasons why I've been a long-term sub at my local neighborhood school, which is a blessing because it's 10 minutes away, is because of how I just not enough teachers and just not enough resources and support, and so I'm always there. And there and just looking at what's going on nationally with the tax on um kind of teaching that really want to do around, like critical, cultural like teaching and um like civics and all of those things that really challenge like white supremacy, right? Because that's basically what I think it's all about, is challenging like the current power structure. And so that's why they are trying to silence our voices and ban our books and prevent teachers and attacking tenure so professors can't, teach, with academic freedom. Um and so, what for me, what I always come back down to is like my what I feel my purpose is in this world. Like I really do think teaching is a calling. I love as much as I like. So I've worked in politics and I ran for office and I've worked for politicians before. And I think there's a huge opportunity there to make some like really systemic legislative change. But for me, I just feel like it's nothing like, coming to class every day, greeting and being greeted by the students and asking how folks are doing and like the jokes and the learning and um being a mentor like every single day. I think it's just such a huge blessing. But I also don't think that altruism, right, that a lot of educators have, committed to helping young folks, that altruism should be exploited by district leaders or others who think now, since we're gonna do the job anyway, that it's okay to underpay us, right? And so that's why, even though, so I am committed to teaching, but I also want to make sure that I'm also being involved in spaces like the labor union to organize around increasing the wage, so that teachers have a decent standard of living, and advocating for more investments in public education, so our students get all the supports that they need. And I think a huge part of that is supporting the professionals who are providing those services. Um, and so that's what I always come back down to, is that purpose and the opportunity for change, because we are making some, especially here in Los Angeles. And that also gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And, you mentioned in there the role of the union in your union activity. And I think Jeff and I each started the profession at a time when, well, shortly before the Great Recession, which happened many, many years ago. But we've each experienced waves of what the economic realities of our nation did, what those impact, how that impacted younger teachers. So myself, as a teacher, I've been pink slipped maybe 3 or 4 times, and my perspective at the time in particular was that seniority was what mattered most. So as a young teacher, I felt that the union didn't really seem to have my back when it came to these pink slips. I saw folks being protected who I felt weren't doing nearly as well in the classroom as I was doing. And my role with the union early on was what is a little bit complicated. And, that was another era. And now we see unions under attack in various ways and challenges here locally and of course, in other states as well. So we're wondering, as a Gen Zer, as somebody who's new to the profession, what your view is on the role of unions in the present context of education, and why you think your union activity is so important to your experience as an educator.
Yeah, what you mentioned is really important. It's also something that I've learned about when I was doing labor studies, learning about even with all of the great provisions that unions, brought to us, right? Like with the New Deal, all of those protections and benefits weren't extended to, Black workers. And so, things have changed, but even now, still, right? Because there's a lot of emphasis on collectivism, which I think is really important. Because as individuals, it's hard for us to ask the superintendent to increase our wages. So there's a lot more power in numbers, but we also need to always remember that that we are also still like individuals with our own, challenges, our own school sites, and so I definitely appreciate you bringing that up. As a Gen Zer trying to enter union space, I am often usually the youngest person in these spaces and probably the only Gen Z. And I think it's important for me to be in these places because um, because we need more teachers, right? We need more teachers to enter the workforce, and folks aren't going to be um, as ecstatic to enter the workforce if the wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living, right? As Gen Z and millennials, we're coming up during times of constant economic crises and pandemics and like wars and all this stuff. And the notion of like owning a home is like more like a pipe dream than a reality unless they move to a different state, which and even some of these states like Texas, housing costs are also going up too. And so I think it's so important now more than ever to be involved with the labor union to change, some of those cultures that doesn't protect individuals, but to also ensure that because all the gains that we have, they are not like it's not permanent, right? Like even recently with the Supreme Court, they just voted against the Teamsters, basically attacking their right to strike. And this is 100 years of labor rights that have been, precedents have been in the law books for a long time, and that's also being attacked. And so it's so important for us to organize, to get involved, to protect our rights, but to also ensure that the future of the profession is also protected as well. So that's why, I try to be in these spaces. And within the LA Fed, I think it's also important in terms of the coalition aspect of it, because, yes, we are teachers, but we're also, we work with, custodians, work with janitors, we're all part of a broader ecosystem. And so I think it was so important when UTLA and SIU Local 99 had their solidarity strike a couple months ago, the first joint strike in LA's history, the two largest LAUSD unions coming together. I think that type of solidarity is so important. And I just want to quickly add, because a lot of the folks who are attacking education, they're also attacking unions because they also understand that we are in many ways like the last line of defense when it comes to protecting education. And we're seeing that in Florida, where they're making it harder and more complicated for folks to join the teachers union. And I fear that that is just the beginning, right? More states will look to them for can they also reduce teacher union numbers. And so we got to tap in, organize, and keep fighting.
Yeah. Absolutely, Brian. I think you're 100% right about that. And just to give folks out there perhaps a little bit more context about a couple things you said. One is the joint strike that took place here recently in Los Angeles with essentially the teachers union and then the largest union representing the classified staff, the support staff who work on school campuses, who also coincidentally, happen to largely be parents of the children who attend our schools, right? And right. So the kind of solidarity that you're naming there and the result of that action, which, there's complication, technical parts of this, but it will eventually lead to a 30% salary increase in a nutshell, right? And so, this was a huge labor action and also a huge economic win, not only for workers who deserve to be paid fairly, but also literally, in this case, for parents of the children that we teach. And we know about the crippling effects that poverty has on a student's ability to be able to be ready for school and come to school ready to learn. So the kind of mutually beneficial labor action that took place here, I think, is a really fascinating example. You also mentioned the recent Supreme Court case, I think at the very end of May, handed down an 8-1 decision, essentially siding with a business who claimed that it was economically harmed by a strike, by a labor stoppage, and that it had the right to sue the labor for damages as a result of that, right? And this is a egregious attack on workers and organized labor and the ability for people to fight for humane and living working conditions. And so just want to give a little bit of context around that for folks and say that these are massive issues also coming into our field in education as well. You also mentioned a very important point, Bryant, about we need more teachers, and that is 100% right. And we need more teachers like you. We need more teachers who represent the diversity of our community, more teachers who look like our students, more teachers who are in many cases from the communities that our students are from, and who bring their cultural wealth and experience to the table in the context of a teaching profession that I believe nationally is still something like 70% white women. Even here in the state of California, where 78% of the students are students of color, the educated workforce is approximately 58% white and 73% female. We have very, very few black men working in education, generally speaking. So from your perspective, how do we get more Bryants into the field of education? What are some approaches to diversifying the profession that you think would be effective with your generation?
Yeah, absolutely. The numbers are, very striking, but I think it's also like the results of the kind of traditional education system we have right now. I think one of the main reasons why we don't see as many educators of color working in schools is because a lot of us, K to 12 education system, creates like traumatic experiences for students of color, right? Black students, especially Black girls, are excessively penalized, for violating, codes of conduct, right? So talking back or what I would describe as more like self-advocacy, pushing back or challenging, authority, that oftentimes gets met with with arrest. And here in Los Angeles, we have moved away from having cops on campus, but in most parts of the country, we still have, police at schools. And so for a lot of folks, probably, may not be as inclined to come back to a space where if that was the first time they were arrested or first time being treated like, being dehumanized, right? And so I think, and that's just one aspect, not to mention many ways in which students are reminded, whether it's in the curriculum, that their experiences aren't, like valuable or, have educational value, like in Florida. And so, making sure that K-12 education is equitable and inclusive of all, so that students of color have positive experiences and will feel more inclined to come back to make a change here. But and when it comes to college, I think one of the major barriers for educators of color entering the teaching profession is like the cost, right? When I was going to even El Camino College, which, thankfully, because of that, my financial burden is a bit less than other folks, and I still had to work two jobs, while while being a full-time student, as I was also interning and doing all the things that I felt help me be more competitive, but also just to really get more experience. But unfortunately, a lot of these internships don't pay. And so I had to work, two jobs to get to college because I'm still supporting my household. And even at UCLA, where I continued advancing at my academics and interning and doing all these, things that I thought I could never do, I was still working at Macy's. The same Macy's I was working at El Camino, I was working at a different location at UCLA because the reality is for working class students, for students of color, folks who are in the barely middle class, is even though we're in college and even at the number one public university in the country, that doesn't erase the economic realities you have at home. What's the point of going to UCLA if I come home and mom is homeless, and so removing that financial barrier, bare minimum, canceling student loan debt, having more robust financial aid packages for students of color, for working class students, and for me, what I really would like to see is free college, for all. I think we need to go back to the culture of seeing higher education as a public good, and as a result, we should make public investments so that we can have an educated, populace, and not continue to perpetuate a system that benefits folks who come from generational wealth. Because if you come from like that kind of household, cost of education isn't really a factor. And so removing the friendship barrier from college. And then for those like me who want to enter teacher preparation programs, we also, my dream, making it free, right? But at the bare minimum, also offering those similar financial aid packages and paying student teachers. As I was applying, or I can't remember, either after as I was applying for grad school or after I was listening to one of the All of the Above episodes, and you were having a conversation about teacher prep programs. And I believe Manuel mentioned something about how, folks want to be a teacher paying to enter these programs, and then you're essentially, working for free, right? Because you're a student teacher, it's labor's work, but it's free. But because of the nature of being a student teacher, because of the nature of being a full-time student, you don't have really the capacity or the feasibility to work a part-time job. And so that's a whole year worth of potential wages you could have earned, gone, and you're entering now workforce, a profession that is also being underpaid. And so that's tough, when
Yeah.
you don't come from much means. And so I think, paying our, teacher candidates, in California, we are making some progress, I think, and some other schools across the nation are as well with some of these fellowships. But, you know, um, I don't want to make it seem like I'm asking for too much, because honestly, I feel like it's not asking for too much. Like, we need to invest more, right? Like, even with some of these programs where it's a residency program, a fellowship program, they're offering 10 to 20K living stipends, right? Imagine you're like me, you're a substitute teacher making 3,000 or so a month, which still isn't like enough, right? Um, you know, in Los Angeles, but making about 3K a month, just to like survive, and then now you're losing that to make, 1 or 2,000 a month. And so, yes, some of these programs, cover tuition and there's a lot of benefits, but, we still got to pay rent. So we still got to eat. And so, investing more, expanding more, financial resources for those programs, I think would also, help Gen Z, working class, BIPOC, first gen folks enter the teaching workforce more.
Yeah. Brian, before Manuel asks the final question here, I just want to share you're giving me traumatic flashbacks to
Man.
the day after we graduated from Harvard. My checking account had exactly 13 cents in it, and I had well over $100,000 in debt from undergrad and graduate school combined.
Oh, man.
So so I feel you deeply. I'm sorry, Manuel.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Man, you needed to take that 13 cents, man, and invest in some bootstraps and pull on those harder to work your way up.
I needed
Come
to
on,
just
man.
not buy a latte with my 13 cents, and then
Right.
everything would be okay, right?
Avocado
Yes.
toast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Brian, we know your studies are about to begin very shortly. So before we get you out of here, so you could go ahead and embark on this journey and move out there to the Cambridge area, Boston area, and explore and learn and blossom into a fully credentialed master's in education having teacher. We just want to point out, teaching, even during the good times, even when it's going really well, teaching is very, very hard work, of course, and existing within this institution of education, it's really arduous, especially for those of us who are justice-minded and who pour our hearts and souls into trying our best to develop a humanizing space for our students and do what we can to improve upon the system that we have here. So sometimes old heads, such as myself and a lot of the listeners and viewers of the show who've been classroom teachers for a very long time or been working in some capacity in education for a very long time, sometimes we forget what it felt like to be young and embarking on this journey and all the hope and optimism that we had at the time and daydreaming about what our classrooms would look like and what our interactions with students would be like and all of that. So we do want to ask you yourself as a young, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed upcoming teacher, if you could share a little bit with us about what you envision your classroom space looking like and feeling like when you are fully in there in your own classroom, fully credentialed, fully mastered, and doing your thing. What's that classroom look like? What's that classroom feel like, man? Give us some hope and some inspiration, those of us who are old heads.
I love that question so much. I love the question because it's definitely very aspirational, but it's also rooted in, a long history of educators who are working within the confines of a system that makes it hard for us, for folks who look like us to be fully human. But what definitely gives me hope is the fact that it was their hope, the educators before, like Carter G. Woodson and Richard T. Greener and all of these music educators, that hope that if we cultivate the minds of the next generation, that they will continue to add to the legacy of of justice, of fighting back, and knowing that down the line that we will win, that we will overcome. And so what gives me hope what gives me hope, and kind of like envisioning like what my classroom would look like. It's definitely a space where there's just laughter, where, as bell hooks talks about in Teaching to Transgress, the cultivation of excitement. Students are excited to come to the classroom because they know that they are loved by Mr. Odega, because they know that when they enter Mr. Odega's classroom, or even the school, because I also want to do the work of making sure the school as a whole is also safe and loving of our students, that they feel safe because the teacher cares for them, they love them, that that they will see themselves within the curriculum, that they know that if they have questions or if they want to push back on what Mr. Odega is saying, that they have the liberty to do so, because it's a democratic space, it's cooperative, we're learning together. That even as there are things to learn from Mr. Odega, because he went to UCLA and is going to Harvard, but there's also a lot of things that they themselves as the student has to offer to him, to the school, to society. And so that is how I envision, my classroom, and my pedagogy, my approach to teaching is still like developing. But I've been reading a lot, of, bell hooks, of listening a lot to Cornel West. And, right now I'm reading a book, by Professor Jarvis Givens, who's a professor at Huxley, and went to my high school at King Drew. He's from Compton, and he wrote a book about the art of Black teaching, the case of Carter G. Woodson, and fugitive pedagogy, talking about the ways in which Black teachers were able to, like, even within the constraints of white supremacist education, they were still able to teach in a way that liberates their students and themselves. And so for me, my approach is going to be rooted in, raising the critical consciousness of our students so that they can recognize the world around them, but also recognize their own power within themselves, and feeling empowered enough to be the active agents of change that Paulo Freire was talking about. And so overall, it's about love, it's about justice, and it's about community. And that's what keeps me going every single day. And I look forward to the day where I'm able to do that in my own classroom.
Wow, Bryant, what a beautiful way to to end today's conversation. And I know for me, this conversation has been not only just fascinating to engage in with you, but also given me a fresh feeling of hope, knowing that there are educators like you who are coming down the pipeline. And let me be the first to say, Bryant, I work with a network of 20 schools here in Los Angeles, including many schools in Watts, where you went to school as a young person. And a year-ish from now, when you're getting ready to graduate, if you want to come back to LA and teach in the community, hit me up, man. You got my information. We can figure out how to make that happen, man. But thank you so much for joining us here today on All the Above.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been truly an honor, and I'm just truly grateful for what y'all are doing here with All of the Above.
Thank you. Folks, that's it for today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us, but definitely stick around. Next up is our Class Dismissed.
All right, folks. Now it's time for Class Dismissed, where we like to shout out folks doing wonderful things in the world of education. And we just had such a wonderful conversation just now with Bryant Odega, a member of Gen Z. So it's only right that for today's Class Dismissed, we shout out another Gen Z person, Gen Z educator, Gen Z person making their mark on education. So Jeff, who we got for today's Class Dismissed?
Yeah, Manuel. I'm very excited today because we have a story coming out of the state of Idaho, and I think honestly, the last time we talked about Idaho on the show, it was not for good news. It was the teachers who dressed up as the border wall for Halloween. So very excited to be having a much more hopeful and inspiring story coming out of Idaho, and that has to do with a young man named Shiva Rajbandari. I hope I am pronouncing his name correctly. Who in September of last year, at just the age of 18, became the newest school board member in the Boise School District. And he has just recently completed his first year of service on the school board. Now, some of you might be shocked by this. You only have to be 18 years old in order to be an eligible candidate for school board in Boise. And he won, defeating one of these far-right extremists. And he has a political organizing background with the Sunrise Movement, and a lot of kind of youth activism. Has helped lead things in the Boise School District, like a first ever survey about youth mental health. Like advocating for climate change and environmental advancements within the school district, a bunch of things like that I think are bringing fresh perspective, and also a lot of the priorities of youth, of current students and young people to the table in the policymaking space. And so exciting news. Congratulations to Shiva. Out there in Boise. Keep up the great work. And I imagine he also just graduated from high school. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but congratulations if that is the case, and excited to see what big news and great things are coming next for him, along with his continuing work on the school board. So good news coming out of Idaho today, Manuel.
Dope. I love it. The youth, the young folks, They remind us that the future isn't all doom and gloom. We do have some excellent folks entering this hellscape of a planet who are committed to making things right and doing the right thing. So shout out to Shiva and all the other Gen Z folks out there who are marching towards justice and doing what they can to do better than previous generations did, to do better than the folks who created this current situation, this current world that we are in right now. So yeah, the youth, man, we're gonna be all right. But folks, that about does it for this week's Class Dismissed. Shout out to everybody who is still with us all the way at the end of this episode. Do remember, you could catch all of our previous episodes at AOTAshow.com. And if you liked or enjoyed anything that you heard on this episode, please consider taking the time to leave a little written review so folks such as other Gen Zers who are searching for podcasts about education issues to help them understand the landscape could more likely come across it in their feeds. So yeah, leave a little review, thumbs up, 5 stars, all that good stuff. But do remember, we love y'all. We hope everyone's doing well out there. And that about does it for this episode. We'll see you next time.